Let's start simple. What do we actually know about death? Biologically, death is the point where the body stops functioning, the heart no longer pumps, the brain ceases its electrical activity, and the cells begin to break down. From a scientific perspective, this is straightforward. We can observe it, measure it, even predict it in certain ways. We can study the process in detail, from the gradual shutdown of organs to the chemical changes that occur after life ends. In this sense, is a natural phenomenon, just like the changing of the seasons or the flow of a river. It follows rules, patterns, and processes that are consistent and observable. Yet, as soon as we leave the biological realm and move into the human experience, death becomes profoundly mysterious. Humans have a unique consciousness, a sense of self, an awareness of time passing. While our bodies are subject to physical laws, our minds create stories, memories, and anticipation. Is unlike anything else we encounter because it is the end of the very thing that experiences life. We can study the body. We cannot study the cessation of subjective experience. There is no one left to report on what death feels like. In that sense, it is one of the few aspects of reality that remains entirely outside the scope of direct observation. Humans have spent thousands of years trying to make sense of this unknowable boundary. Cultures have created myths, religions, and philosophies, all attempting to answer the question of what happens after we die. Even though there is no measurable evidence for these claims, they persist because our minds are wired to seek continuity. Consciousness experiences life as a continuous flow. The idea that it could simply end abruptly and completely difficult for us to process. Feynman often emphasized that our intuition is not always a reliable guide to reality, especially when it comes to questions outside our everyday experience. Death is exactly this kind of question. The paradox is striking. We are aware of our mortality, yet we cannot directly experience what death is like. This creates a tension in human thinking. On one hand, we observe and measure life scientifically. On the other, our imagination and fear create a world of possibilities that science cannot verify. Feynman would point out that accepting what is known and what is not is more honest and intellectually satisfying than clinging to comforting illusions. He urged us to confront reality as it is, even when it is unsettling. One way to approach this is by using a simple analogy. Consider a candle burning in a dark room. While the flame is alive, it gives light, warmth, and motion. When the candle is extinguished, the light is gone. There is no lingering consciousness in the wax or smoke. The flame has simply ceased to exist. Life is much like this. While we are alive, we illuminate our surroundings with perception, thought, and curiosity. When we die, that illumination ends. There is nothing beyond that point, at least from a scientific perspective. This is not tragic or cruel. It is simply the natural conclusion of the processes that sustain life. Feynman encouraged people to examine life and death with curiosity rather than fear. By focusing on what is observable and measurable, we gain clarity. By accepting the limits of our knowledge, we avoid unnecessary illusions. Death, in this sense, becomes less a mystery to fear and more a phenomenon to understand. It is part of the natural order, a boundary that defines the finite nature of experience. And in acknowledging it, we gain a deeper appreciation for the time we are alive, even though we can describe the biological process of death. Our minds struggle to comprehend it because of the limits of human understanding. Feynman often emphasized that science is not about providing comforting answers. It is about discovering what is true and admitting what we do not know. When it comes to death, we encounter one of the clearest examples of these limits. We understand life in terms of chemistry and physics, the way molecules interact, how electrical signals pass through neurons, how organs function. The cessation of consciousness cannot be experienced from the inside. There is no one left to experience the absence of experience. This creates a strange tension. We are aware of mortality, yet we cannot directly observe the end of awareness. Our brains are wired to interpret and imagine, but imagining non-existence is a paradox. Every thought about what happens after death arises from a conscious mind trying to conceive its own absence, which is inherently impossible. Our struggle to explain death is also tied to evolution. From a biological standpoint, fearing death is useful. It motivates behavior that promotes survival, reproduction, and the protection of community. We have evolved that not to embrace the idea of ceasing to exist, because this awareness could threaten our ability to act and plan effectively. Yet this very wiring complicates our intellectual understanding. We can know scientifically that death is simply the end of the biological processes that sustain life. Our emotions resist accepting that this also means the end of subjective experience. Feynman would observe this with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Human intuition is not always aligned with reality, especially when dealing with phenomena far outside everyday experience. A useful analogy is to imagine a movie playing on a screen. The film runs, scenes unfold, characters move, and stories develop. When the projector is turned off, the images vanish, is no lingering experience of the film itself once the mechanism stops. Life is similar. Our consciousness is like the projector, translating complex processes into awareness. When the projector ceases to operate, the experience ends. The universe continues, stars continue to shine, chemical reactions continue, but there is no observer left to witness it. Science can describe the universe continuing without us because it relies on measurable events, not subjective experience. The concept of nothingness may feel frightening because it is impossible for the conscious mind to directly comprehend its own absence. But this difficulty lies in our perception, not in reality itself. Feynman would urge us to treat this as a phenomenon to observe rather than a problem to solve. By focusing on what is observable and measurable, we avoid the pitfalls of speculation and superstition. The boundary of death is a natural consequence of the rules that govern life. It is neither malevolent nor mysterious in a supernatural sense. Our emotions make it seem dramatic or tragic, but the underlying truth is neutral. Life arises from processes that have a beginning and an end. Accepting this allows us to explore the mystery of living with a sharper lens. By confronting the limits of our understanding honestly, we can appreciate the fleeting nature of consciousness and the rare opportunity to experience reality firsthand. Recognizing these limits also opens a new perspective on curiosity and learning. Death, by defining the finite window of experience, highlights the value of observation, questioning, understanding while alive. Feynman loved exploring phenomena not to achieve fame or certainty, but to witness the marvel of nature directly. In the same way, contemplating death scientifically allows us to focus on the time we have and the depth of understanding we can attain. By admitting what we do not know and cannot know, we find clarity and a profound appreciation for the processes of life itself. Feynman approached death the way he approached physics, with careful observation, curiosity, and acceptance of the limits of knowledge. He never claimed to know more than the evidence allowed, and he was always clear about what could be measured versus what was speculation. This honesty is central to understanding his perspective. When considering death, Feynman did not indulge in comforting illusions or philosophical abstractions that could not be tested. Instead, he focused on what could be understood and acknowledged that beyond that, the answers are simply unknown. There is no experience of death that can be reported, no phenomena to measure once consciousness ceases. This is both startling and liberating because it removes the burden of fear rooted in speculation, allows us to see death as a natural endpoint rather than a mystery to be solved. Feynman often used analogies and thought experiments to make abstract ideas clearer. One way to understand his perspective is to imagine a flowing river. While the river flows, it carries water, energy, and motion. Each drop is part of a larger system, moving in patterns governed by physics. When the river dries up, the flow ceases. The water molecules continue to exist in other forms, evaporating or seeping into the ground. The river as a conscious flow no longer exists. Life can be viewed in a similar way. Consciousness is like the flowing river, a remarkable phenomenon arising from complex interactions of neurons, chemicals, and biological systems. When these systems stop, the flow of consciousness ends. There is no observer left to experience non-existence. From this perspective, death is simply the natural conclusion of processes that once created awareness. Analogy highlights a subtle but important distinction between the universe and experience. The universe continues, indifferent to individual life or death. Stars shine, galaxies rotate, and chemical reactions occur, whether we are alive or not. Consciousness is a temporary lens through which we observe and interpret this vast reality. Feynman delighted in this idea, not because it diminishes life, but because it emphasizes the extraordinary nature of the time we are aware. Each thought, each observation, and each question exists within a fleeting window of existence, and acknowledging this limitation enhances our appreciation rather than diminishing it. Humans struggle to grasp this because our brains are not naturally equipped to imagine non-existence. Trying to conceive of no awareness is like trying to imagine a color we have never seen or a dimension beyond three-dimensional space. Our intuitions break down. Feynman would remind us that this is not a failing. It is simply a reflection of the way evolution has wired our minds. Consciousness evolved to navigate the world, not to comprehend its cessation. Understanding death requires the same disciplined curiosity we apply to physics. Observe what is observable, model what can be modeled, accept the limits of knowledge. Feynman's perspective also reframes the way we value life. If death is the end of experience, it makes the act of living and learning more precious. Finite window of consciousness gives meaning to curiosity, exploration, and understanding. Fame, recognition, or fear of what comes after are secondary. What matters is the direct experience of reality. While it is possible, Feynman loved learning for its own sake, for the sheer joy of uncovering truth, not for accolades or eternal remembrance. By embracing the inevitability of death and the boundaries of knowledge, we can approach life with the same clarity and honesty that Feynman applied to science. It is a perspective that both humbles and inspires, a lens that allows us to see existence itself as remarkable, even fleeting. Even though death ends consciousness, it can also be seen as a phenomenon to explore, much like the natural laws of physics. Feynman loved thought experiments because they allow us to grasp concepts beyond our direct experience. One way to understand death is to consider our awareness as a lens on the universe. While we are alive, this lens perceives, interprets, and interacts with the vast reality around us. When we die, the lens disappears, but the universe continues exactly as it did before. Stars shine, planets orbit, and particles collide, oblivious to individual existence. Consciousness is a temporary interface between our biology and the universe, a spark of perception that is both fleeting and extraordinary. Another way to think about this is through the concept of energy. Life is a dynamic system, a constant flow of energy in various forms. Chemical reactions in our cells, electrical impulses in our brains, and thermal processes in our bodies all maintain the organized state we call life. When death occurs, this organization collapses. Energy disperses according to physical laws. Nothing mystical is required. The energy does not vanish, but the structured flow that created consciousness ceases. Feynman would point out that understanding this is not depressing or nihilistic. It is illuminating. It reveals the mechanics of life and death without invoking illusions or unfounded speculation. Humans often struggle to accept this because the cessation of consciousness feels counterintuitive. Our minds are wired to imagine continuity. Stories of an afterlife or survival of the soul are comforting because they satisfy this desire for continuation. But these stories are not evidence. They are narratives created by human cognition. Feynman emphasized the importance of distinguishing between what is known and what is imagined. He argued that living with uncertainty is more intellectually honest and ultimately more rewarding than believing in comforting but unverifiable notions. Accepting the scientific perspective on death does not diminish life. It highlights how remarkable our awareness is while it exists. Thought experiments can also clarify our understanding. Imagine observing a river from above. The river flows, twists, and carries debris along its path. Each droplet contributes to the motion, yet the flow is a property of the system as a whole. When the river dries, the flow ends. Individual droplets continue to exist. The dynamic system that created motion and pattern no longer does. Consciousness is like the flow of the river. It is emergent, dependent on complex interactions within the body, and ceases when the underlying system can no longer sustain it. There is nothing left to observe or experience. The challenge is that humans try to imagine themselves as the observer after the flow has stopped, which is inherently impossible. Feynman would find this a fascinating illustration of the limits of human intuition. This perspective also reshapes the way we approach living. If consciousness is finite, the value lies in the act of observation itself. Life becomes a fleeting experiment in perception, discovery, and understanding. Fame, legacy, or even fear of death are secondary to the direct experience of existence. Feynman lived this truth every day, exploring physics, nature, and ideas for the pure joy of understanding. Does not threaten the significance of life. It defines it. It sets the boundaries of experience, making curiosity, learning, and observation not just valuable, but precious. By contemplating death scientifically and honestly, we gain clarity, appreciation, and a profound sense of the wonder of simply being alive. To explore death further, we can use thought experiments to push our understanding beyond what we can directly experience. Imagine yourself as a tiny observer inside the universe, aware of time, space, everything around you. Your perception gives meaning to events, colors, sounds, and sensations. You interact, think, question, and observe. Now imagine that this observer ceases to exist. The universe continues exactly as it did before. Stars still shine, planets still orbit, particles still collide. There is no one to witness it. From a scientific perspective, this is all there is to death, the permanent end of the observer. There is no lingering experience, no consciousness floating elsewhere, no subjective continuation. It is the ultimate boundary of experience, a limit that defines the scope of life itself. Feynman's perspective on this is both simple and profound. He often reminded people that the universe does not revolve around human desires or fears. Just as planets follow physical laws without concern for our understanding, consciousness arises and ends according to biological processes. Death is the natural conclusion of these processes, and there is no evidence to suggest that subjective awareness persists beyond them. Recognizing this truth can be unsettling, yet it is also liberating. It removes illusions, superstition, and unfounded speculation, allowing us to see life with clarity and honesty. By embracing the scientific perspective, we accept the reality of our existence without distortion, and we learn to value the rare and fleeting phenomenon of consciousness itself. To understand why humans struggle with this concept, consider the nature of imagination. Our brains are wired to simulate, predict, and create narratives. We imagine ourselves in the future, revisit the past, and contemplate alternative realities. Death challenges these abilities because it represents a state that cannot be simulated, the absence of an observer. Every attempt to picture non-existence is made from the perspective of consciousness, which cannot experience its own cessation. Paradox explains why myths, religious beliefs, and afterlife stories have been so persistent throughout human history. Feynman would caution that these narratives are products of the mind, not evidence. Science teaches us to distinguish observation from imagination, reality from comforting illusion. Another way to approach the concept of death is through energy and systems. Life is an organized pattern of energy, chemical reactions, and electrical activity in the brain. Consciousness emerges from this organization. When the system collapses, energy is redistributed, processes continue, and the structured pattern that created awareness disappears. Energy does not vanish, but the experience does. This perspective is neither grim nor pessimistic. It is merely an accurate description of what happens. Feynman's fascination was with understanding processes, not with seeking emotional reassurance. In this light, death becomes a subject for observation rather than a source of fear. The finite nature of consciousness also reshapes our understanding of existence. Knowing that our awareness will end encourages us to focus on what can be explored, experienced, learned while we are alive. Curiosity, observation, and understanding become precious because they occur within a limited window. Feynman pursued knowledge for its own sake, not for fame or legacy. In the same way, contemplating death scientifically can deepen our appreciation for life itself. It reminds us that consciousness, fleeting though it may be, allows us to witness, question, and marvel at the universe. The end of awareness does not diminish the beauty or significance of the experience. It defines it. By accepting the scientific reality of death, we gain clarity, freedom, and a profound perspective on life. It is a lens through which existence becomes extraordinary precisely because it is temporary. Death is not something to fear or speculate endlessly about. It is a boundary, a natural phenomenon, and a reminder of the remarkable, transient gift of consciousness. Feynman's approach shows that by facing the ultimate limit with honesty and curiosity, we can appreciate life more fully and understand our place in the universe with awe, clarity, and wonder. As we approach the final reflection on death, it is important to consider what this understanding means for the way we perceive reality. Death, from a scientific perspective, is the ultimate limit of experience. It is the point where the observer ceases to exist, where consciousness, which interprets and interacts with the universe, comes to an end. There is no evidence of experience beyond this boundary, no continuation of perception, and no observer to report on it. The universe does not stop, the laws of physics do not pause, and matter continues to interact according to its own rules. Consciousness is a fleeting phenomenon, a temporary lens through which the universe is observed. Death is simply the moment when this lens is removed. Feynman's view on this is both honest and liberating. By recognizing the limits of what we can know, we free ourselves from the illusions and unfounded fears that often cloud human thought. There is no supernatural element, no mystical continuation of the self, no requirement for comforting narratives. Instead, there is clarity, precision, and an opportunity to see life as it truly is. Death becomes a boundary that gives life definition. It is not something to dread, but a natural consequence of the processes that allow consciousness to emerge. Understanding this, we can approach life with a focus on curiosity, observation, and learning the very things Feynman valued most. One way to internalize this perspective is through a thought experiment. Imagine standing in a vast field under a starry night sky, aware of the immense scale of the universe. You observe, think, and feel, fully conscious of your surroundings. Now imagine that moment ending permanently. The stars remain, the universe continues its expansion, yet your awareness has ceased. There is no pain, no thought, no memory, simply the absence of the observer. While this may seem stark, it also highlights the extraordinary nature of the conscious moments we do experience. Each thought, each sensation, each act of understanding is a remarkable event in the context of a universe that does not require an observer to continue. Feynman would suggest that the value of life is not measured by its duration or by recognition, by the depth of understanding and engagement with reality during the brief period of consciousness. Death, by defining a finite window, amplifies the significance of the moments we have. Every observation, every question, every insight becomes precious precisely because it exists only within this narrow span. Curiosity, inquiry, and honest examination of the world are meaningful not because they confer immortality, but because they illuminate the fleeting experience of being alive. This perspective transforms how we see reality. Life is a temporary spark, a flow of awareness and perception within a vast, indifferent universe. Death is not tragic. It is a natural boundary that frames this spark. The fact that consciousness is finite makes the act of observing, questioning, and understanding the universe even more remarkable. Feynman reminds us that we should approach reality not with fear or denial, but with curiosity, rigor, and awe. In the end, the mind-blowing lesson is this: death is the ultimate teacher. It does not diminish life, but defines it. Consciousness is a rare and precious phenomenon, and the universe, while indifferent, allows us to witness it for a brief, extraordinary moment. By embracing the scientific reality of death, we can see life as a fleeting miracle of observation, understanding, and wonder. This is the Feynman perspective, clear, honest, profoundly transformative.